terms of the topic, it's a huge topic to cover in 30 minutes, as I'm sure you can all agree. And in the last 3 years, of the word influencer marketing is increased in Google search by 1,500%. So it's no doubt this is a huge thing. With a recent survey last year, brands are looking to increase their marketing budget and spend in influencer marketing by 62%. So I think we can all agree that it's a big thing, it's a hot topic, it's obviously working and is successful. So rather than wasting your time on stuff that I'm sure you can Google and read yourself and stuff that you probably already know, I really wanted to gain a lot of a deep dive and insight from 3 incredibly smart and handsome people and beautiful people, but rather than myself, rather than me. So to my left, I'd like to introduce Ben Cronin. Ben is the global head of Publicis Sport and Entertainment, which is the access point for brands working with one of the largest communication companies in the world. He is a sports fanatic, but does not want to talk about monkey tennis. And having recently met him, he is as tall as he is lovely. So I'm looking forward to talking about some of the big brands that he works with, which include P&G, EA Sports, and Samsung. To his left is John Clark, who is the Senior Vice President of Sales at Fenway Sports Management, which is part of Fenway Sports Group, which owns the Boston Red Sox and Liverpool Football Club and a racing team as well, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But more importantly, or at least to this conversation, is LeBron James and his marketing agency, which is LRMR, and his other media outputs like Uninterrupted, which is going to be very interesting indeed. And then finally we have Sene, Naoupu.
Perfect pronunciation.
Yeah, thank you. I've been practicing. Of which, if I went through her CV and accomplishments, it would probably be until this afternoon. So I'm not going to go there, but effectively, she is Ireland Women's Rugby Union International. Her education and background is in marketing and business, which lends itself really well here because not only is she a marketing and business professional, she's actually a top athlete, and with over 20,000 followers across social media, she is effectively an influencer herself. Which makes it a really good panel because we have buyers, sellers, and effectively the product. And Sene also is leading the global agenda on commercializing women's sport, which is also really topical, which we'll get into as well. So I wanted to kind of kickstart the topic with John, actually, because you're quoted as saying that LeBron James is only one of 10 athletes of his kind. And obviously, I mean, it's obvious why you would work with him. I mean, I don't need to talk about that. But what I'm curious to know is, do you think what you're doing with LeBron James could be replicated with other athletes?
Well, I think a little bit of historical context. We started working with LeBron in 2010, right before the decision, if you know that story, from when he left the Cleveland Cavaliers and went to the Miami Heat. And at the time, he was represented by a large agency and one of many athletes, and he felt strongly about himself and his personal brand, and that he wanted to be represented solely. And we, as an agency, Fenway Sports Management, weren't necessarily looking to get into the individual athlete representation world, and we've since not. We've partnered with LeBron. Rather than representing him, he's involved in anything that we would do. So I don't know that it can be replicated, because most important thing in most of life, as I've found, is timing. It came at a time when free agency really started to heat up, at least in the States, and I shouldn't say it started to heat up, but the athletes became brands themselves. And so he took a position early on in his career, and certainly in some of the dialogues we've had with other brands he's worked with, that he is a product in and of himself. He's a business person, and so I don't know that it can be replicated. What is certainly happening is he's carved a path for many other athletes to do the same and get into the multiple lines of business. But again, first off, he is as unique an individual as you'll get. Basketball talent, worldly talent, but so many other talents. One small anecdote, we were on a commercial shoot, this was 4 or 5 years ago, and the director, after 2 hours, we had an 8-hour day, the director's like, I can't have him do it again. Like, he did it perfectly. He's an actor, he's been in movies, so he is as unique as it gets. So I don't think it can be replicated. I think he's helped build a path for many other athletes to follow, and I think what's to come now, because, the athletes can own their brand in so many different ways because of social and digital now. I think the path forward's there for many others, and a lot are doing that right now. If you look at Steph Curry or you look at Tom Brady or others, and on my quote, the one of 10 is there are 10 mega superstars that are wholly owned businesses. There are many other athletes that will say I'm a business in and of itself, and if you were to do the metrics behind it, the social media following otherwise, they are there as well. But then you've got to follow through on so many other things that LeBron has to build that brand and to build the business.
Sene, actually, I want to take it to you because effectively you are a mini LeBron James. You're a businesswoman.
Oh my God.
You're an athlete.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of LeBron James.
I mean, how has it changed for you over the years, especially, playing sport and being a businesswoman and being a marketeer? Like, are you looking at what kind of outputs you're making in order to kind of like harness and capitalize on the stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, I think firstly, we spoke earlier, John and Ben and yourself, actually about timing. And for me, I've obviously a New Zealand-born Samoan. I moved to Ireland. So for the last sort of 10 years, it's taken me a while to, I suppose, be established in some ways as an athlete here. And the timing for me was something that was really important, and that I was able to attract a relationship with a company like Lineup Sports to help leverage my deal. So I think for a start, that was the first step towards, I suppose in some ways, a marker for that stage of commercial deals and things like coming in. So certainly that relationship has actually grown, and we've been able to form a number of different brand partnerships with national, global brands.
So are you conscious in terms of your social media? Like, do you scrutinize what you're putting out there?
No, I'm very natural in terms of, what I do put out there. First and foremost, I'm very passionate about girls and women in sport anyway. That's been a passion of mine since I was growing up. So a lot of my content and a lot of, I suppose what I'm involved with is centered around, the promotion of, girls and women in sport anyway. So I think that lends itself quite organically in terms of what is currently now an environment and a climate where businesses and sport organisations are actually realising that it makes business sense to invest in women's sport. So because I've had that background, and then obviously because of my work in the marketing side of it, there's been a really natural partnership. And again, because there's a lot of different things that I'm doing, but also training and playing as an athlete at the moment, I'm just really lucky that I've got a partnership with a company like Lineup Sports to help me with that as well. Excellent.
Ben, from a brand buying perspective, I mean, we're talking about LeBron James, we're talking about Sene. How do brands approach this? Because obviously authenticity and being a genuine advocate for whatever you're talking about is important, but how does it work internally when you're working with P&G and you're looking at all of these athletes, these hundreds of thousands of athletes? How do you decide?
Yeah, different brands come at it from different angles, to be honest with you. Some of them have already decided what their story is and the message they as a brand want to get across, and some of them are just looking for a mouthpiece for that story. So in order to do that authentically, they need to find the right talent to attach that story to. Others are a lot more fluid than that. Some brands just know their challenge that they've got for their brand, and therefore they're more willing for an athlete to tell their story and attach themselves more directly to the athlete's story and not have to go through that intermediate piece which kind of says this is what we're trying to put onto you, and they're actually more willing to say, okay, let's learn about you and we'll attach you to us, if that makes sense in that way. So it comes from both ends of that. We work with brands right across that piece. I think the best campaigns are the ones where those two worlds sort of interlink really closely. So they've been able to identify a talent that really is, the story that they want to get across as a brand. So one of our historical clients has been EA for a couple of years, and we've worked across a number of their titles, but I'll give you the story about the kind of the FIFA console game which they have. They use talent an awful lot in the marketing of FIFA, and it's really important for them to reach their game-playing audience. Now, FIFA is quite a unique product that their game-playing audience are all football fans as well that are following those stars as well. But finding ways that talent can show that the game is really them and they're part of the game and they enjoy the game is really the core of all that content that EA put together to market the game. And finding the right talent that represents the young, in their case, the young people who are playing games, the gamers, the people who are getting involved in it, the banter that goes along with that. And I'm sure we've all seen those kind of FIFA films of player A and player B, throwing the controllers at each other. It's quite a well-worn path for them now. But it works. It works because those players are then sharing that content with their audiences, and their fans who like them and want to follow them are then thinking, right, if I play online, I wonder if I'm going to come across, player X that is my hero. And they do, and they try the same tricks, and they play as that player, and it really works in a strong way for them in an authentic way.
Yeah. I mean, you touched on, obviously you talked about FIFA and esports, and that's a specific thing, but you did touch about a younger audience, and Gen X and Gen Y, and there's the obvious challenge that sport is having a hard time attracting those people because they're not sitting in front of TV screens as they used to. Do you think influencer marketing is like a solution to that problem?
Yeah, firstly, I'd just challenge that whether those young people are engaging in those sports. I think they are. They're just not doing it in the traditional way.
Yeah. Sorry, that's what I meant.
So they're not on. They're not watching the traditional sort of measure of success for a rights holder used to be how many people are watching my linear TV program. And it's the same, I'm sure, for all your properties. But that audience have now moved to other places. They've not disappeared, actually. They're just elsewhere. And one of the beauties of athletes as well making themselves available and telling their stories, what there is an increase of is the availability of those athletes and a greater knowledge of the stories that sit behind those athletes. I guess it used to be the case that I don't know, if we winding back the clock 25 years or so, you only ever heard about the athlete outside of a match day when they were rolling out of a pub on a Sunday night or something, or done something they shouldn't have done. Fans have always been interested in the lives of those athletes, but it was only the Monday morning newspapers that told them about it. The world of social media now has made athletes more accessible, and the athletes have opened themselves up to that world to have those one-to-one or one-to-many relationships that they can have with their fans. And I think following sports is better for it, to be honest.
Talking about risk, actually, Sene, are you concerned about falling out of a pub drunk now that you've got access to social media? And so many other people do. People recognize you, snap you.
A lot of people don't recognise it. I'll tell you what, we have a final this Saturday in the women's interprovincial final. So on Sunday, whatever happens. So, but I'm.
But does it affect how you are out in public? And do you look at that as an effect on, this might actually hurt me financially moving forward?
In essence, absolutely. I've always been like that. When you're an athlete, you have a responsibility to be a role model. Whether you're a very older sister or brother, you're a role model. So I've always been like that. So that's in my nature anyway, but it doesn't mean I can't have a good time So certainly I'd be well conscious of that. Yeah.
I think brands, when we talk to brands, and that's representing whether it's an individual or the properties, there's just a different dialogue that has to go along with it, because the reality is it's still a human being, right? And the brand of a team, the Red Sox brand, is we have to think differently. The perfect, and we've always said this when we talk to property or brands that would be interested, the perfect marriage is you have the athlete, you have the property, and you have the brand all aligned, right? And that's the kind of the perfect world. Doesn't always happen, whether it's budget or there's not alignment. There's a lot more flexibility with an athlete because, in this case, Sene can make a decision on what she wants to do. With teams, there's a little less flexibility because you're talking to a wider audience, right? We pride ourselves as the Boston Red Sox. We're not a political place, right? Our goal is to be the place that people can get away from the real world, right? I've always said I've had a 24-year career in the not real world of sports. And we think that's the value proposition oftentimes. And back to one of your points earlier, we have plenty of Red Sox young fans. To Ben's point, they're just not watching it on TV for 3.5 hours. It's one of the challenges we have with baseball is how do we tighten it up and it's a great highlight sport, right? So they're actually consuming a lot of it digitally and socially. So I think we talk, if you look at contracts with athletes, there's a lot more risk provisions in contracts, right? That and again, I think falling out of a putt drunk is very different than some other things that can be done in today's world as we live. And that's the reality. A brand has to be willing, and that's why brands spend a lot of time with individuals to get to know that person and understand, setting aside all the, yes, I want it to be an authentic message, is it if this person does make a misstep, because we're all gonna make a misstep. And unfortunately today, you can get caught on film with the missteps. How does that work as it goes forward? And that's a lot of the dialogue that goes on, but it does enhance the opportunity that brands have and athletes have without a doubt.
Talking about contracts, and because both of you sit on different sides of the negotiation table on that, obviously it's kind of evolved from you need to do X amount of posts or you need to wear my cap when you do interviews. How do the contracts look now compared to a couple years ago? What are the precautions that you're taking, both from a selling of rights and both from a buying of rights? Are you aligned? Are you misaligned? How, people are human. You can't really put that stuff in a box.
Although we come at it from different sides of the tables, we're actually there often to try and bring those two sides of the table together. So I think there's often a lot of common ground, but we're representing different sides within that. I think within the contracts over the last perhaps 2 years, we've seen maybe a couple of things really come to the fore. I think the recognition or the control over the types of messaging that go on the athletes' social platforms have come into play in a way that they never did. It used to be, could you repost something of mine? Now the brands are asking for that athlete to be a genuine part of those posts, and that requires some give on the behalf of the athlete. They can't just do it for the cash anymore. They kind of are sticking themselves alongside this brand, which is good. It works for both parties, but in the same way that does, as you rightly say, open up levels of risk as well. The brand is saying, yeah, it's not just a mouthpiece and a platform that I'm asking for. I'm actually asking for an ambassador, someone who's going to be an advocate for my brand and really stand for my brand. And from the brand's point of view, certainly from our side, we're seeing them put in greater stipulations and controls over what an athlete even looks like in some cases. So Gillette being an example, they don't want to have an unkempt
I'm not a good Gillette
athlete, right? You wouldn't be a good Gillette athlete right now. But those
the athlete part is the first fall down.
But those kind of stipulations, and they have to be talked about. And actually, one of the great parts of the role that we do, and that John from the other side of the table does as well, is shine a light on that for each party. Our role as much is to show the brand what they're opening themselves up for and letting them make informed decisions about that. And the same from John's side, I guess, on the terms of on the side of the property.
And we have a very different dynamic because we also own a NASCAR team. And NASCAR teams, the model's different. So the sponsor of the car gets an endorsement deal from the driver. So if you ever watch NASCAR, it's like the model that any brand is like, I wanted to say my name 150 times. Well, and this is why NASCAR affinity numbers, fan loyalty numbers to brands are so high, because they understand the model that if that brand's not there, my driver's not driving. And that's where it's different than the mainstream, kind of big 4 or 5 leagues that we have in the U.S. So when you get into that dynamic, and we deal with this all the time, is if a brand puts a stipulation, I need him or her to tweet 5 times a month. How is that authentic? If we're at the end of the month, it's like the cops with they write a certain number of tickets by the end of the month. It's like, oh, I got to tweet 3 times in the next week. Like, it's not necessarily
next
authentic.
24 hours.
Yeah, exactly. So there's got to be a lot of give and take, and I think that's where the best companies we work with, we all get on that up front, right? And that's where it is top to top. You want the C-level to meet the athlete themselves and really have an authentic conversation about what the goals are for whatever the partnership may look like.
The fan affinity to that, you highlighted NASCAR as one of those. We're seeing those same behaviours coming through very strongly in the esports sector as well.
Yep.
The fans involved in esports at the moment are really open to are open to brand engagement because they know those tournaments, those opportunities. Right. The fun that goes along with playing esports doesn't exist in the same way. I've had 1 or 2 examples in female sports as well because of, it used to be you should do this as a CR play, but in the last couple of years, the CSR play. In the last couple of years, the uplift in women's sport in particular, the audiences that they're getting, brands are not just doing it as a CSR thing anymore, and actually you've got that combination between the fans and the players and the teams and the rights holders in that, bringing almost like a perfect storm of goodwill into that with a platform and with an audience that is big enough to have that goodwill of making things work from a fan as well as a brand side.
And the influence there is the social impact that, brands affiliate with the female player or the athlete. The social impact is certainly, influential in itself, never mind any of the ROI that's involved in that particular deal.
I mean, you talked about NASCAR and kind of having everything wrapped up together. I mean, is there a concern or a challenge that players are becoming more influential than the brands that they play for or the teams that they play for? I mean, if you compare the 70 million followers for Barcelona FC compared to the 118 million that Lionel Messi has, I mean, there's an argument to say that actually Lionel is more valuable.
From a brand side, it's a really big question. I think probably 2 years ago, you'd sponsor a team or a club, and you would assume that you were getting those players along with that. Contractually now, clubs used to get around it a little bit. Rights holders used to get around it.
Yep.
Would put a non-specified rule of 4 players into the contract, but even on their side, they would think, our 4's not going to include Messi. But they would never say that to the brand. And actually, we would get into, again, it's part of our role. We need to have those conversations up front with John and his colleagues to say, look, are we going to get LeBron? Are we going to get Messi? Are we going to get the big players? And if we're not, let's have the upfront conversation that says, and we'll do this on our side with our brand and say, look, did you really want the Miami Heat deal or did you really want the LeBron deal?
Right. And that's where you get into the front of the shirt versus the back of the shirt, right? And that's where I think, again, it's a broader audience for the team, whether that's Red Sox Nation across the country or Red Sox in New England, and then there are Mookie Betts fans. And I think, a Messi, a LeBron, LeBron I think is 5x the social following of the Lakers. That stated, LeBron leaves, most Lakers fans are still going to be frustrated Lakers fans currently. So I think it's a different dynamic of those, and if you broke it down, I'm sure somebody has. We all can love individual athletes. We all had our heroes growing up. There just wasn't as much movement from the teams that they played. And we work here locally with the GPA and the GAA, and we were talking a little bit earlier, where you play for your county, and that's the only team you play for. So you will love that person in that county, and that person will then retire, and you'll still love that county and wait for the next person. And that's very different, certainly in the States and certainly in global football, with the advent of transfers and free agency. So we still, as property owners, we still believe in we've got to continue that brand of the Red Sox, of Liverpool, and help growing that. And then the athletes certainly, and we never say they come and go. We want to embrace them. We talk with Julian, who's over the Jaguars. We have to embrace our athletes and get better at doing that, and then let them know what we're trying to do. And I think when you get that alignment, again, that's where there can be successes where you can talk to, we did something this year with Ford's been a long-time partner of the Red Sox. J.D. Martinez was a relatively new athlete to us, and they wanted a spokesperson, and he's a guy that does his own endorsement deals, but it made sense that you wanted him to be the face of your brand campaign within the New England market. The other thing that's also important for athletes and why there are no restrictions with athletes, right? There's territorial restrictions, at least for us in the U.S. sports, where you can only market a certain distance around your home facility. That's why global football is interesting, because Liverpool can use global rights. So that adds an element of, if you're going to work with an athlete, you can work with them anywhere in the world. And that's a dynamic we don't have, at least in the U.S. sports landscape.
And Sene, how do you feel about that, being an athlete? Have you ever been asked to post stuff or do stuff that didn't align with your own brand or values just because it was based on the team, or?
In the past, yeah, smaller brands, but certainly now I've just been really, really grateful that a lot of the brands that I've been able to work with were brands that I completely aligned my values with. So Dove is an example, product that I've been using for over a decade anyway, and certainly in terms of its brand awareness and perception that it encourages all body types and is very body positive. It's something that I already aligned to anyway, so that was a no-brainer sort of deal for me. And then, there's other brands obviously aligned to recently that just happened to genuinely align with my values. So not so much recently, but in the past, yes.
I'm going to take some audience questions from the audience, so thanks for putting them in. And actually, a number of them tie in with my last question, so I'm just going to kind of wrap it all up. And it's really on measurement. John, I've got you quoted as measuring the love, not the eyeballs, from a recent event that you did. And Ben, I've got you down as brands aren't interested in scale for scale's sake. And so let's talk about metrics. How are you guys measuring this stuff? How do you decide? What metrics are you using to decide on the athlete? What data are you using to leverage that? And how do you value the endorsement deals that you do?
I think the first number to kind of dispel is just the follower numbers. I think you mentioned the 20,000 at the start. That's actually pretty irrelevant to most brands now. For a couple of reasons, probably the primary reason being that no one believes those numbers are real people or actually active people that actually are engaging for a real reason. What's more valuable for the brand are the people who are going to act on the content they're seeing through the athletes' channels. So they're interested in engagement. They're the engagement with the pieces of content, the engagement that athlete has with commercial posts on their own feeds.
So are you literally looking at how many comments are being made? Because this is what I mean. What exactly are you looking at?
Comments, likes, shares.
Everything.
They're enormously important because those are the metrics which for a lot of brands they're the bought metrics elsewhere anyway. The beautiful thing about having athletes doing it for you is not only are they giving the brand message, but they're living that brand message for you. So it's even more powerful than a bought like that you can buy on a social media buy through.
That's what I'm saying. You can buy likes and you can buy comments.
Yeah,
now.
but when they're attached to the piece of content themselves, it's even more powerful, and that's really the elements that brands are looking to associate to and gain value from. And actually, probably I would even say I'm doing myself a poor job in the negotiations here. That's the bit I think that still isn't valued enough by athletes, if I'm honest with you. The value of engagements that they're bringing to brands is probably an undervalued part of their mix of what they bring.
All right.
I'm being nice there, aren't I? Sales job for you, so.
John, question for you. As a team rights holder, do athletes' rights in that team get in the way as their influence grows? We kind of did talk about that, but just from a rights holder perspective, are you worried?
No. Again, in today's world, there's plenty of room for both. And again, perfect world, they're completely aligned, both the athlete and the team. One broader thing, and we've heard this all day, it's about the emotive value that we bring as sports properties or athletes or rights holders. And that's the key is, I always go to a meeting with a brand and just say, look, tell me about what you're doing in marketing in general, and let us be a supplemental part to that. And those are the partnerships that work the most, because back to your measurement, every brand is going to measure it differently. I think about when we did the first LeBron Kia, and I shared this story earlier, he posted before we had a partnership, and the negative feedback on Instagram, which again got raised, it's like, why would he have a Kia? And Kia's whole goal was they were launching a luxury car in the U.S. This is 4 years ago, the K900. They just wanted you to raise your eyeballs a bit and say, look, if LeBron James will drive this car, why wouldn't you? And within a year, Kia had followed every single one, and literally it did a 180 from the negativity on day one to 365 days. It was very positive, and then they took it one step further as a great example, and you can go look at these. They pulled 4 tweets, 4 responses, and they called him up and said, hey, Ben, we're going to use your tweet in an ad. And so you can look up LeBron James in a spaceship, because somebody tweeted, I'd see LeBron in a spaceship before I'd see him in a Kia. So we did it. We're at a $15 million home in Miami, shooting LeBron in an astronaut costume, climbing into his rocket ship, and then driving off in a Kia. And Kia, again, has the flexibility as a brand. Not other brands can do that. So I think it's key that we measure. It's not so much competition. It is a decision a brand can make. And again, perfect world, we all get to partake in that and build the right partnership. But at the same time, I think we'd never look at it as competitive. Again, the brands embrace all of the above, and that's when everyone wins, I think.
Sene, just for you, how would athletes realize the value of their team's success as an influencer?
Well, team success is the most important in terms of, in some ways, I think timing for me, this time last year, we'd won a championship where I was fortunate to be a captain, and then, relationships started building after that, and we got more and more, we've become a bit more high profile as a team in Ireland.
But do you plan it out? So I mean, you're going for championship. You could win, you could lose. Do you future plan it, thinking if we win and I'm a captain, this is what I'm going to roll out, and I'm going to roll it out because I hope to attract these types of brands commercially?
No. Sorry, no, not at all. First and foremost, obviously the team first. We're focused on that competition, but on the back of those sorts of events, that's where a lot of, I suppose in some ways. Relationships were genuine relationships with brands and partners came on board kind of around that time as well.
I think one thing, Jay, is that's if there is risk, that's where it is, and Sene, you handled it perfectly, is when you might find an athlete making decisions for his or herself before, because again, all these the popularity is tied to still winning, right? They're still incredible athletes, but if they don't win anything, it's always the athlete that didn't win something. So I think the only risk is if you find someone, and there's a current one that just joined the New England Patriots that has been doing a lot for his brand and not so much for the team. And now, interestingly, he's gone to the team that it's all team first. And when you have a Tom Brady, funny anecdote, when someone joined there as a free agent, he said, when Tom Brady's a guy at the door saying, welcome, here's my cell phone, if you need anything, call me. He's like, nobody else can do anything other than be part of the team, right? So that's the challenge, and the risk is there. So it's great to hear an athlete say it's about the team first, because that ultimately is where the success for everyone is built.
Excellent. Final question from the audience. Again, based on risk. John, this is for you, but I think everybody can probably weigh in on it. Not every player will have a positive influence commercially. Question for John, how can a team insulate itself from the adverse effect of players' negative actions?
So a lot of that goes into, and when you think about our sports, you get to know these as they're young athletes, or if they come in from free agency, you do all the background and due diligence, but again, we're all human, so we make mistakes. So it's less about insulation. It's more about understanding what the situation is, and then coming together as, again, the team with the right positive movement. And if the player needs help with whatever that situation is, giving him or her that help. And if there's not, if there is something much more significant to be there, is make sure, and this is what happens today, and sadly, is you're guilty well before you have the chance to ever really dive in and see what the actual facts are. So I don't know that, and it's probably someone for our president of the Red Sox or president of Liverpool, that I don't know that we'd ever worry about insulating ourselves initially. I think the most important thing is just to understand what the impact is across the board. Understand it is still a person, and then that person is part of a team, and where does that net out in the end, which should take time. In today's world, there isn't time, right? Everything happens just like that. Good, bad, or indifferent.
I want to flip that on its head, actually. What about a player's positive influence? I mean, Sene does all this stuff for women and empowerment and women's sport and helping to commercialize that, and you don't know what she's going to do in the future. How are both brands and rights holders supporting athletes like Sene, and how do you, I guess, support that so that obviously builds brand value to you? What are you guys putting in place to amplify that?
From a brand's point of view, behaving in the right way with the athletes is perhaps number one. I think one of the things you said right back at the top, John, was talking to the athlete, being interested in them, getting to know them, and that means not just turning up at a shoot with your contract in hand, saying you were meant to be here for an hour and a half, not an hour and 15 minutes. But that needs to come from the brand as well, right? And but the payback is long term for them as well if they do behave right, because I mean, in American sports in particular, many's the story where I know there are a few people from Nike in the room, but many's the story of particularly the sports apparel brands getting involved early in a player's career and being very supportive to them. But those relationships really paying due dividends by the end. And that's not just for apparel brands. That's we've worked with Heineken for a long time, and some of their long-term brand ambassadors come back year after year, not because Heineken's paying them another few grand to turn up at a hospitality gig, but they like being with those people. They know what the brand stands for, and they're actually representing the brand, not just for the life of the contract, but over the rest of their careers as well.
Yeah.
I think from the property, the key is it's a two-way street, right? Our head of marketing for the Red Sox is engaged with our athletes as anyone, and understanding what they are, whether that's, Mookie's got a charity bowling tournament that we're going to support, or him working with us on the Jimmy Fund for the Red Sox property. So having that two-way street, and again, the embracing of both sides of it is key. If that doesn't happen, which having worked in all 4 leagues now, I'm shocked at it's actually the minority of teams that do that. There still is a lot where I think it's a more friction than it is anything else between athlete and team, when the reality of it is we're partners in this. Now, the reality also is we could be partners this year, and next year you're playing for the arch rival. And that's today's world. I think we're slowly getting to be okay with that, whereas 10, 15 years ago, it was like, oh, I'm off of his bandwagon because they left my team. But now, because it is such a business, people understand the business, right? Most of the athlete, or the GM, when it happens, like, it's a business, that's just what it is. At some point, we had to make a decision. And people are more understanding than that. So I think both sides are best, to keep it as positive as possible while that relationship exists. And then even then some. Like, we still do work with athletes that don't play with the Red Sox anymore, and for their charitable causes and so forth. And that's, just good community partner that the Red Sox are.
I feel like there's a big theme of collaboration here, which I love, in terms of the athlete being able to genuinely engage with the sport organisation or the sport management company, whatever it is. And for me personally, even just sort of really quickly, one of the provinces here in Ireland, Leinster Rugby, for example, sat down with their commercial director, sponsorship manager, had the conversation, and at the same time, it was during a few months after I had essentially left a Rugby Athletes Commission meeting with World Rugby, and we were our intention was to lead a global agenda to commercialise the women's game, and then being in a position where thankfully was a captain for this particular province, that's an opportunity there to be responsible for, okay, what can I do, in terms of what can we genuinely do. And then we sat down together, had a conversation, super guys there in the branch, and this year you can see and you can measure it from our season so far for the last 2 months has been an increasingly a higher profile, some fantastic content going out there from our sponsors and things like that. So that was super, and those are sorts of things. So me personally as an athlete, yes, absolutely grateful for some commercial relationships that I have personally, but certainly it's a real privilege to be able to help our girls out in that level that a province is getting their sponsors on board in terms of bundle deals. And at a national level, there's interesting bundle deals going on as well. GIA, who have partnered for our AIL competition, sponsoring the men and women. So there's a whole lot of that in the background that absolutely I'm passionate about. And then from an individual athlete point of view, absolutely passionate about the brands that I personally work with. So the collaboration there is the biggest thing. And I love that stuff. That's relationship building, and that's where it starts.
I want to throw out one shout out for one of the brands that LeBron started with Maverick Carter, Uninterrupted, is their social digital platform. And what they've done, LeBron, again, I think he, at the right time, started up and built this business. They are bringing in other athletes into this. And the U.S. national women's team, the soccer club, have been involved with Uninterrupted now, where they are giving an uninterrupted voice to the athlete. And they're working, and we're working with brands to bring them in. And again, a little bit different in that it's, the brands come in and then they'll go to the athlete and say, hey, are you into this brand or this category, so on and so forth. This is the type of the messaging. And it's not as large scale as like true endorsement. It's more of a social campaign, but it's allowing the athlete to have a voice. And then again, perfect world, that brand also works with their team. And I think there's a lot of growth opportunities there that we're excitedly working with on a day-to-day basis with the Uninterrupted platform.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I think if we could all join together to thank our amazing panelists. That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.